Hello everyone. I've come to talk to you a little bit about next week's reading, but before I do that, I just wanted to compliment you on your posts. There were some exceptionally good posts on the reading of our last set of readings, and I hope that if you have a chance, and you haven't done so already, that you will go to your colleagues' posts and read them. I always find in online classes when people are posting that the general level of the work tends to go up, and it tends to kind of go up to the highest, best post. And I think that's a wonderful thing. You can learn a great deal from each other, and I hope you will take that opportunity. Anyway, this week is a reading week, and the focus of this week's readings is on the question of the animal mind. De Mello is going to offer you an introduction to the subject, and in offering you that introduction, she looks first at the history of animal behavior studies, and she traces it, or at least she alludes to its beginnings, all the way back in ancient Greece. But she really focuses on the study of animal behavior that begins in the 17th century and that continues, of course, until the present day. 17th and 18th century. The 18th century is really kind of the very beginnings of this scientific project. Some of the important figures whom she touches on include Linnaeus, and you may have heard Linnaeus's name before. He is credited, and undoubtedly, or not undoubtedly, but probably the very first person to come up with a system of classification for both animals and plants. And it was a very, very important system of classification because it was used for many, many years without modification. There are, of course, problems with systems of any kind, systems of classification. And one of those problems I'll just mention to you is that once you begin to classify things in large ways, say human beings, animals, things like this, you do lose a sense of the individual. And so that will be a limitation of Linnaeus's system of classification. But it's nonetheless, of course, a very, very important system. She also speaks, of course, of Charles Darwin, from whom we get our understanding of evolution, an extremely important figure in the 19th century, and really the figure who gives us what we call one of the major narratives of our time. Darwin, Freud, and Marx. These are enormous forces who really change the way that we think about things. And in Darwin's case, that had to do with changing the way that we think about our own evolution, but also, of course, about the evolution of animals. She also speaks briefly of figures that you might not have heard of before, figures who are not known to many people outside of the world of animal behavior studies. One of them is Charles Otis Whitman, and he is kind of known today as the founder, or the father of modern, or at least somewhat modern, animal behavior studies. And of course, this is modern. Is not exactly the term that we would use now, not contemporary, but he's moving certainly past Linnaeus, way past Linnaeus. A figure you may have heard of, who she touches upon, is B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was a psychologist, and he is very famous for thinking about conditioned behavior. And if you're studying psychology, you very well might encounter the work of B.F. Skinner. A little bit later, in the long history, comes Jane Goodall, and you may probably have heard of Jane Goodall and may have read something by her or seen various video clips of her working. Jane Goodall, of course, worked for many, many years. She's a primatologist, who dedicated her life to the study of chimpanzees. She also changed the course of animal behavior in a significant way by beginning to develop a sense of empathy with the animals. Observation, obviously her observational skills were fantastic and finely honed, but she changed the nature of the study by suggesting that we see these animals, but as individuals. She named them, something unheard of in scientific practice, and she thought about them, right, in an objective but also an empathetic way. Very, very important. She also mentions Eileen Christ, who is an environmentalist and whose work some of you may be interested if you're interested in particularly larger issues about the greening of the world and the relationship between human-animal studies and a kind of eco-criticism or eco-poetics. And finally, she also talks about Donald Griffin, who is a more recent kind of father of what we call cognitive ethology, right? And if you see that word ethology, just remember it's another word for animal behavior. The primary question that de Mello is posing in this chapter is, do animals have a mind? And of course, when we ask that question, we have to know what we mean by mind. And so as you struggle with answering it, or struggle with what she's saying, or grapple, I should say, I don't mean that it's necessarily going to be a struggle, but as you encounter the research that de Mello presents, the first thing that you want to do is to begin to develop a definition of mind. What is a mind, right? What does it do? What are the limits of the mind? And so that would be an important sort of point of departure, I think, for all of us. Until very recently, the question of the animal mind was simply not posed at all. Or if it were posed, I think the most conventional answer to the question, do animals have a mind, was no. Now, and really how animal behaviorists from other centuries, and some of the more conservative animal behaviorists still practicing or studying today, I believe that everything that animals do can be explained by instinct as opposed to mind. Times have changed, however, and now many, and I would be willing to bet the majority of animal behaviorists believe, with Donald Griffin, that animals are capable not only of cognition, right, not only of understanding, but also of thinking, and very importantly, right, of consciousness, right, that animals have a consciousness. Behaviorists are also beginning to study the emotional lives of animals, and discerning that animals share with us a very large host, wide range of emotional response. Other people are studying language, animal language systems, and making quite incredible discoveries about language use in various animals. And all of this leads to the largest question that de Mello is asking, and that is, do animals have a self? Right? That is, do they conceive of them in a way similar to the way that we conceive of ourselves? These questions become very interrelated, right? But when you start to break them down, really try to think about what is mind, right? What does that mean? And what is self? Right? What does it mean to have an awareness of the self? The chapter is also going to introduce us to a number of concepts that become quite important. Right? One of them is, of course, behaviorism. Right? What does that mean? Another one is reductionism. And a very, very important one is, of course, anthropomorphism, right? And that, I want you to really understand, right, what anthropomorphism is and how anthropomorphism pervades, right, our thinking about animals and, of course, also about the planet itself. The supplementary materials for this week include both another reading and two videos, one of which I just added. The reading is by Mark Bekoff, in a book that I had you purchase as a required text for this course because I think it's so important. It's also extremely readable. Once you begin Bekoff's reading, you'll find that it's a breeze to read and very interesting. The chapter that you're reading for this week in that text is Cognitive Ethology, Studying Animal Minds and Hearts. And Bekoff, doesn't actually separate entirely, the idea of cognition, between the head, and the heart, as we might say, but begins to see how all of these things are working together. He's a major voice in the field, and I think you'll find his style very engaging and very personal. I've also included 2 videos. One of them is a video by Dr. Savage Rumbaugh, and in this video she is talking with Kanzi, an ape. And I think you'll see just how extraordinary this interaction is. And it I'm hoping that the videos will bring to life some of the more academic questions posed by de Mello about language, about emotion, but also about mind and self. And finally, I added a video that I meant to add before I designed this class because it's really an extraordinary story. And it's a video of Dr. Irene Pepperberg, and she is an animal behaviorist. And it's a video of her working with Alex, an African gray parrot. She worked with Alex for 30 years. And really, the work only stopped because Alex suddenly died, died very unexpectedly. But for 30 years, every day, Irene Pepperberg and some of her team, her scientific team, worked with Alex on language. And just a 12-minute video, but it will give you a sense of the kinds of experimentation she was doing, and a sense of her findings, which were really quite incredible. Her findings are primarily about language use, and cognition, but they're also about emotion. I think, and if you're interested, if you become interested in Pepperberg's research and her relationship with Alex, there's a film called Life with Alex that I think you'd love. It's really quite a beautiful documentary. I think that the reading this week is going to be particularly enjoyable and revelatory, and I very much look forward to your responses. So thank you again for your blog posts. And let me just remind you, I hate to continually remind you, but I think we're still early in the semester, and I just want to remind you about what the blogs are doing, What are they supposed to do? The blogs are there to gauge your engagement with the materials and your level of critical thinking about them. And when I look at the blogs, I'm really looking at several things. I'm looking to see if they're cohesive. I'm looking to see if they're detailed, That means well developed. I'm looking to see if they're referenced. When you talk about things in your blog, do you then reference the reading? And I'd like to really encourage you to take this part of the blog seriously. Go back and find passages in the texts that you're reading to use in your blogs. It's very important, to support your arguments with direct textual evidence. They should be, of course, also semi-formal. And by that I mean your writing should be proofread, It should be clear, and it should be directed to an audience. It may not be the writing that you would use, the writing style you would use in a research paper, and it should really reflect your voice, the originality and uniqueness of your voices. But it should also do so in a way that is semi-formal, grammatically correct and coherent for an audience. Also, of course, just one other thing, even though it's very early in the term, please do keep thinking about your final research papers. Think if there's something that really interests you in the reading for a week, make a note of it so that when you turn to your research, you have some sense of where you want to go. So, enjoy the reading. Please, of course, always feel free to send me questions. You can always do that through the link to questions about this course. And you can also, if the question is private, of course, you can also send me a question by email. I am standing by, right, waiting for your responses and your questions. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Talk to you soon. Bye.